In this video, we're going to be looking at creating a rate limit tester. Now, these can be used to help solve problems on a server, but it can also be used to bring a company to its knees. Let me show you how. Okay, so let's start off by creating the actual rate limit tester. Afterwards, we'll need to create an API to test against. So let's create an index.js file. Inside this file, we're going to create a few constants and a few variables. Now, the first constant is going to be our max requests. And that max request is going to be equal to 100. And then we're going to create another constant called URL. And we're going to be running against our local host, which will be http://localhost port 3000. Just need to change that const to lowercase. There we go. So the next two things we need to set up are two variables. We have a let, which is a request count, and this is what we're going to increment every time we make a request. So that's just going to be equal to 0. And the next one is going to be let start. So this is actually going to be the time it started, and we're going to have that equal to null for now. Then we're going to create a couple of functions. So the first function we want to create will be called make request. And that's going to be equal to an async as an empty function. We're going to have that as an arrow function there. Inside here, we're going to have a few constants. We're going to have a response. And that's going to be equal to await and fetch the URL. So we're going to be using JavaScript's built-in fetch method. And we're going to pass that URL through to there. The next one is going to be const data, and that's going to be getting the data from the response, and it's going to be converting it into JSON. And then we're just going to console log that data out. Underneath here, we're going to create a const that's going to be called a rate limit tester, and that's going to be equal to an async again, empty function with an arrow. And then we want to set up the start time. So we're going to say if start doesn't exist, then what we want to do is we want to say start is equal to date.now. And then we want to increment that request count. So we say request count plus plus. Now we need to do a little if statement to say if the request count is greater than the max requests. And then what we need to do is create something called an elapsed time. Say const elapsed is equal to date.now minus start. Then we can say if the elapsed time is less than 1,000, the const wait time is equal to 1,000 minus the elapsed. And we can just say, we can just console log out now that the rate limit has been exceeded, and it needs to wait a certain amount of time before it runs it again. So we need to put in these backticks on this and console.log. And then we're going to await for a promise to come back from this resolve. We can close that if statement off. And then underneath here, we need to reset our request count. So we can say request count equals 0, and the start is equal to null. We can close off the if that we have here, and then we can start making our request. So we say await and then make request, this reference to this function up here. So there's three ways we can actually get this rate limit tester running now. We can just say rate limit tester, and that will run it over once and then finish. The other thing we can do is a set interval, and we can tell it to run this rate limit tester every 1 millisecond, for example. So this will just make it continually run until we actually come and say Command C, and you can have that running forever on as many machines as you want, pointing at the same IP address. But for this test, what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick for loop. We're going to say for let I is equal to 0, I is less than 1,000, I plus plus. So we're going to iterate over it 1,000 times, and then we say rate limit tester. So as you'll probably notice at the top here, we're looking at a local host port 3000. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file called api.js. And also we're going to open up a terminal window now, because we need to just install a few packages. So I'm going to cd into the rate limit folder. I'm going to run npm init-y, npm I express, and then body-parser. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a very simple API, and then I'm going to actually create the function to cause a rate limiter. So I'm going to create some middleware which will actually cause a rate limit to be put in place. So let's say const express is equal to require express. Const body parser is equal to require body parser. And then we're going to say const app is equal to express app.use bodyparser.json. So we're going to pass JSON back. And then I'm going to say app.get. I'm going to have that as an empty string here. All we're going to do here is just say res.json, and we're going to pass back a message that says hello world. And then we can say app.listen on port 3000. And we can say server is listening on port 3000. Okay, so let's test this now and see how the rate limiter goes against the API that's not protected. Because this is running locally, there probably won't be much of a difference. So let's run node api.js. That will start our API app, server listening on port 3000. Open up a new terminal, and we can cd into the rate limiter, and we can run node index.js. We can see there it ran that without any issues at all. If that was an external server that hasn't got any protection in place, that would cause the server to slow down a bit. Because this is a local host, it's not really going to cause that much of an issue. So let's now include a rate limiter inside of the API. So this isn't only just going to show us the rate limiter tests that are actually working, it's going to also show you how you can protect against people doing this same thing against you on your API. So let's create a constant called requests limit per hour. Let's have that equal to 100. We're also going to create a new object called request count. Inside here, we're going to have something called window. So this will be the amount of time. So let's say that is 60 times 60 times 1000. So that's 1 hour. We're going to have a max requests, and that's going to be equal to request limit per hour. And then we're also going to have a requests object here that's going to be empty. And then what we're going to do is let's come down to above the app.get, and we're going to create a bit of middleware. So we're going to say app.use, and that's going to take in a request, a resolution, and a next. I'm going to create two constants. We'll create a constant called now, which is going to be equal to date.now, a constant called IP, which is going to be equal to request.ip. And then we need to initialize the record for the IP. If the IP doesn't exist in request count.requests, then we're going to say request count. So before we move any further, I am actually going to just change this to rate limit, just because it's going to make more sense. Because we have this one called requests, we need this one to be called something slightly different, so we can tell them apart a lot easier. And then we can close that off. So what we've said here is if the IP doesn't exist in rate limit.requests, so rate limit.requests, what we're going to do is we're going to create it inside of there. And then underneath here, we're going to say rate limit.request, then the IP. And that's going to be equal to rate limit.requests.ip filter timestamp. And then that's going to be now minus timestamp greater than rate limit.window. So if the time now minus the timestamp is greater than the request time limit window here, then underneath here we're going to have if the rate limit.requestip.length, so this length is greater than or equal to request limit.max requests. So max request is request limit per hour, which is 100. So if this array is larger than 100, what we want to do is we want to send a response, which is a 429 that says too many requests. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to append the now time inside of this IP on the rate requests. Then once we've done that, we're going to run next, and then that will allow them to move on to the actual endpoint. And then we can close all of this off, click save, and let's restart our API. And then we can run this again. Hopefully we don't get any errors, get hello world, and then we hit too many requests here. So if we bring up the browser and we refresh the browser, we get too many requests because I'm running off the same IP that the API is running off of and the Visual Studio Code is running off of. So let me just close this down quickly. Let's restart the API. And then we'll do this fully in the browser. So you can see I've refreshed, it says hello world. If I could just hold down Command R to constantly refresh this. There we go, we see too many requests. So what this will do, this will then stop the business from happening here. And it will immediately send it in this rate limiter here. So even before they've hit this part here, what it's going to do, it's going to run this first to ensure they haven't had the rate limit set against them. And then if they do pass this, it will then go on to this app.get and then pass on the information that they needed. So in this video today, we've not only gone over how you can actually create a rate limit tester, whether that be for a good or whether it's for bad. Hopefully for good, you'd be a little bit naughty if you want, get permission. We've also gone over how you can protect yourself against those requests. If you found this video useful, hit the subscribe and like button. Also check out the playlist on screen now where I go through how we create the rest of these tools in JavaScript. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.